All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's CPSA webinar called Financial Literacy in Sales, a Key Differentiating Factor in Sales Success, hosted by David Johnston, President at Sales Resource Group. Please note that you've all been placed on mute for the duration of this webinar and that you may ask questions during the Q&A session using the chat function in your GoToWebinar dashboard. I'll just tell you a little bit about David Johnston, our host today. David Johnston is President of Sales Resource Group, Inc. He has a broad international consulting background and offers experience, active participation, and a Sales Resource Group approach to consulting with clients. David has over 25 years of experience consulting for organizations in diverse fields such as broadcast and print media, pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, information technology, retail, manufacturing, and financial services. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to David to start.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for attending today. As Ruplan said, I've been working with sales organizations now for over 25 years, and I've seen an awful lot of change during that time period, but one of the things that I have seen is probably the most challenging for sales organizations is having their people change from being purveyors of product and sellers to being more resources and consultative with their customers and being able to make sales that are both profitable and meet the needs of the stakeholders, your customers, as well as the company. I'm hoping today not to give you an MBA in an hour. My intent is to try and go through some slides that I think will look more at some of the terms and the implications of those terms for your sales efforts, and then maybe have some discussion at the end. And I'm very open to some examples of things that you've seen in terms of financials and how they affect the business. One of the things, we always have our own perspective on our sales. We tend to look at what we're after, what we're trying to achieve. Sometimes we need to take a step back and look at the customer's perspective and understand how these businesses measure their own sales performance, and how do they provide value to their shareholders, and that financial and activity ratios and the things that they look for in terms of the ROI for the investment in your products and services, and what makes a good sale for them as well as what makes a good sale for you. So what I'm going to take you through is first a quick definition of what we mean by financial literacy. Then I want to talk a bit about why it's critical to salespeople, some financial terms that you should know, and then some key financial measures that are important for every salesperson. And finally, how do we develop the financial acumen that assists salespeople to become better at what they do? So first of all, as a financial literacy, as it applies to sales, is the ability to utilize financial knowledge and skills to make effective and informed decisions about business issues that impact the buying decisions and behavior of your customers. Growing up, we learn an awful lot of math, but we probably spend too little time in educating students about the job skills that they're going to need going forward. Financial literacy is a big gap around current job skills, people understanding not only their personal financial capabilities and how to manage those, but also when they're working, what kinds of skills do they have, or what kinds of skills do they need in order to do their job more effectively and efficiently. So why is this critical to salespeople? Well, as I said, sales has changed and it's going to continue to change. And it's not enough that we just know the products and we get an understanding of the customers. We need to understand their businesses, and we need to understand what the financial implications are in their businesses. So when you're putting together your value proposition, it's important that you understand what are the implications of what you're trying to sell them, the size of the deal, the terms of the deal, etc., and what can they afford. Part of understanding those financial implications is looking at your negotiating position going in. And if you don't really have a clear understanding of where your customer is at, it's very difficult to put into place a negotiations position that you can stay with throughout the negotiations process. Secondly, it's important to understand the financials of the business, because it helps you to lead those customers or prospects to better buying decisions. And having done your research and your homework in advance, you can position yourself for a sale versus really having to fight for that sale in order to make sure that it's a win-win for the customer. And when we talk about win-win, it's really about identifying and supporting mutually beneficial sales. We always talk about win-win, but really what we need to do is understand what makes good financial sense for the customer and that they can buy into and are prepared to support and pay for, as well as what we need out of it and what we think is the value to our business. Sales have become a lot more complex. It used to be in the past, if you had a good product and a salesperson who had good communication skills and understood how to develop relationships, that it was going to be enough to enable them to be successful and you to be, as a company, to be successful. Today we have a lot more, a lot of issues that our salespeople are struggling with, including things like RFP processes where over a certain amount, everything has to go to an RFP. We have more decision makers. A lot of times it's not just someone that we're selling to in a buying organization. There may be multiple stakeholders within the customer organization that all have, or at least want a input into the buy decision. The other side, the people that are actually buying from us, believe it or not, when we look at the education, they're getting a lot more training and a lot more education in the supply chain side of businesses versus sales. And as a result, they come armed with strategies and tactics and analytics that are forcing salespeople into price and discounting situations. The second thing is we need to take more of a business perspective on our selling. Business issues are driving buying decisions and buyer behavior. When you're positioning your products and services, you want to make sure that your salespeople are talking to the customer about their business and about your business, and not just focusing on what they have to sell and what the price and the value of the product is. We're finding today that a lot more salespeople that are successful are the ones who can provide a broader perspective to the customer on the value of the relationship between the two businesses, as well as the products and the solutions that we have to offer. And as we talk about solutions, they're becoming a lot more complex. Today, we see a lot more solution selling where it's a combination of tangible products and intangible services that are bundled together to provide an overall solution to a customer problem, and being able to identify the financials around the services and the margins that are involved. And the package oftentimes has a lot more financial implications than just the overall cost and what's in the package. Today, most sales organizations have a focus on growth. And growth is good as long as that growth includes both revenue and margin. You can sell pretty much anything if you're prepared to discount price, and oftentimes the compensation programs reinforce discounting just by the simple fact that they allow salespeople to negotiate price without any implications in the comp plan. But when we look at the financials around excuse me, when we look at the financials regarding a sale that's being brought to a sales manager for approval, we need to make sure that salespeople are looking at both the revenue and the margin implications on our sales. Today, customers are a lot more knowledgeable. They have the internet, they can research and provide more information in some cases about the selection options than even the salespeople can. And as a result, they know what the competition has out there that we're selling against, and they oftentimes try and leverage you in terms of your proposal versus that of the customer to drive down price. And finally, it's critical as part of the negotiations process, the more knowledgeable your salespeople are and the more prepared they are to address objections around price and the implications around price, the better prepared they are to be able to negotiate a successful deal that both you can defend as well as looking at the value that you're providing to the customer organization. It's also important that we look at the financial value of a sale. I had a sales manager that said to me, what good is a sale if you don't make a profit? Well, there are sales, for example, where there's not a lot of profit in the initial upfront sale, but down the road, there may be a revenue stream and a profit stream that makes it very valuable. Some examples of this are the car industry. When you start to look at the amount of margin there is in a vehicle sale today, it's measured in literally a few $100s. However, the value of the sale is largely in the service, repairs, and then resale of the vehicle down the road. The same thing is true, for example, of razors, where you can go out and buy a razor for a cheap price, but the blades that only fit that model are expensive and an ongoing revenue stream for the organization. So it's important when we look at the financial value of a sale that we have different perspectives on it, that we look at the margin that's in the sale, but also how we're going to get further sales as well as the value of those further sales. Secondly, we need to start talking the language of our buyers. Supply chain has become, as I said already, has become a lot more sophisticated, and forcing organizations into RFPs are directly trying to remove the relationship out of the transaction and force it to a price comparison and a discounting comparison. And today's big issue is if we don't talk the language of the buyers that we're interacting with, we're at a disadvantage. So we need our salespeople to be a lot more literate about the financial implications, as well as in being able to talk through the sale in financial terms. The other thing is that when we look at salespeople, if they have the ability to talk financially, and they're talking to people who are trained from a finance perspective, you also develop credibility. If you're just coming in and talking about the product and what it does and why it's the best and why they should be buying it, you're missing the opportunity to build credibility and trust with the customer, because they're looking at it not just from a utilization standpoint, but also from the financials for their own business. We also need our salespeople when they're prospecting or they're dealing with customers to identify what is a good deal. You don't want your salespeople spending a ton of time prospecting organizations whose financials would indicate, if they had done some research, that they probably weren't a good prospect. So having the financial literacy allows salespeople to prospect better opportunities where there's obviously the capability not only to purchase, but have ongoing commercial relationship with you, as well as looking at your customers and identifying where a customer is at, and their positions change over time. So it's not enough to just upfront identify if they're a good customer, but we need to be monitoring our customers to ensure that they're still in good financial position as we move forward. In fact, one of the fastest growing side industries from sales are companies that do ongoing assessments of your customer base and provide you with financial information, as well as insights from the financial information in terms of the quality of the prospect or the customer. We also want to be able to understand the customer when we go in to first look at their business. Very often when we're providing solutions, we'll be asked by the customer, or in our discussions with the customer, they'll be identifying their issues and their needs. And the more financially capable a salesperson is to be able to not only address the physical needs, but also the financial needs, you stop becoming a seller and you start becoming more of a resource to the customer, and you're viewed differently. You're viewed more positively because you can show them the implications of certain options and certain solutions that will provide more value to them as a business, and therefore more value to you in terms of the relationship with the customer. So it's critical that we change salespeople as they come into this business and as they move forward in their careers. We may want to train them to sell, but what we really want to do is train them to be business people who sell. And that's an important differentiation, because if I'm selling, it's more product focused, it's more product centric, versus business people who can talk to the customer about their business, have a broader perspective, understand what are the implications for investment, costs, and we can make the cut. We can turn these salespeople into people that are much better at what they do. So what are some of the financial terms? There are literally thousands of terms that are involved in looking at financial literacy, but let's just go through a couple of quick ones here. So when we talk about working capital, we're talking about cash on hand. What are the things that can be converted to cash? So it's current assets versus current liabilities. This helps us with our tactics. So when we're talking to a customer, what kinds of terms should we be looking at with them? If they have strong cash on hand and working capital, then we might want to talk to them about purchase. If we find that they're a little weaker and they don't have as much cash on hand, we may want to talk to them about lease as opposed to purchase. So working capital is one of those metrics that if we understand where they are with working capital, it will help us in terms of how we position ourselves. Accounts receivable. This is what you owe. It's what you can bring in cash if your receivables can be collected. And it's critical to manage this, because the longer you have outstanding accounts receivable, you will find the more difficult or less likely it is that you're actually going to bring that in. And some organizations actually make salespeople accountable for ensuring that their AR is less than 90 days, and anything beyond 90 days, they may in fact even claw back incentives that have been paid unless the account is paid at some point. Net present value. This is a significant measure for investment decisions. It's often termed net benefit, where we're looking at future cash flows, so revenue minus costs, from an investment minus the cost of that investment. So if we have a customer that has on a particular investment that we're looking to sell them, if it's a negative cash flow or a negative net present value, then it's going to be an unprofitable sale versus a positive net present value where it can be positioned positively with the customer and it's going to be profitable. When we talk about return on investment, this is what do we expect back for the investment that we're putting into this. So when we sell, we're looking at the costs that are associated with that sale and what's the potential return on that. Sometimes we have an ROI that's got a longer term payback, and those kinds of investments, you need to look at what the costs associated with those are, and can we as an organization afford that. A good return on investment should be somewhere within the fiscal year or within 12 to 16 months if it's a longer term investment. When we talk about assets, there's a variety of assets, but it's the economic resources that you own within your business that have value. It can be current assets, which are things that are liquid and we can access the cash readily. Could be fixed assets, could be tangible assets, the objects, the equipment, the buildings that we own, or it could be intangible assets, things such as patents, franchise fees, or copyrights. In particular, when you start to look at people that are in businesses that don't necessarily have a lot of fixed or hard assets, for example, musicians, their copyright is everything to them, because if they don't have control of that, and if they don't monetize that, there's really nothing for them to be paid for. Cost of goods sold is the costs that are directly attributable to the production or of the products and or services that you're selling. So sales minus costs becomes our gross profit that we use in order to ensure that what we're selling is going to generate not just revenue for the business, but also income. Liabilities, these are the things that you owe and the financial obligations that you have. When we're looking at customers' liabilities, it's important to look at their current liabilities and see what they need to be paying in the short term. If they have a lot of short and long-term liabilities, are they going to be able to, if we're selling them a recurring revenue service, are they going to be able to pay for that over the term of a 2 and 3 year agreement? And if we're positioning our sale, if they are having issues with a lot of ongoing liabilities, we may want to make it a shorter term as opposed to a longer term contract. Free on board. This is just a term that FOB, for example, is an importer-export term. It's the point at which the responsibility for goods transfer from the seller, who's the exporter, to the buyer, who's the importer. And when we talk about FOB, it's when does that transfer take place? So if I'm purchasing something and I want it to be FOB Toronto or Vancouver, that means that the point at which it hits that port is when we will exchange the responsibility for ownership and the sale the transaction actually takes place. So these are just a few examples, but there are some key financial metrics that are important to every salesperson. So we're going to go through a few of these. Some of them are more basic than others, but it's important that salespeople understand these things when they get into discussions with a customer about a sale. So we want to talk about profit versus cash flow. There's a significant difference here. Many salespeople see these things as the same. If we have cash, are we profitable? Well, if you don't understand the difference, you could be at a very significant disadvantage in negotiating a sale. And it's also hard to demonstrate value, and then you're really just peddling your product. especially when we are selling to high growth organizations. It's important for us to look at where our customers are in the life cycle and what the implications are for that in terms of their cash flow. So you need to understand how revenues and expenses are accounted for. An example would be if you're selling to a high growth organization and you want them to buy a large piece of expensive equipment that they need to move their business to the next level. When you sell them that capital asset, that asset is then accounted for over the useful life of the asset. So it could be a number of years. And because the asset is amortized over that period, from a profit standpoint, it makes them look very profitable. However, if that price upfront is significant, they could end up being in financial trouble because they've had to lay out the cash for that up front, but they're not actually accounting for it for the next 3 years. So you need to look at customers and understand where their cash flow position is and what the implications of their financial statements say from a profitability standpoint. And salespeople gain credibility when they can have these kinds of discussions around profit and cash flow with the customer. Gross margin or gross profit versus net margin or net profit. We need to understand how your sales contribute to the customer's revenues and costs. We often only look at our own and look at our costs, but when we are looking at a customer's gross profit, that represents what the cost is to run their business. So when we look at the net, however, we want to understand all of the deductions, not just the direct costs. So this includes fixed costs, overhead, and net profit is often termed the net profit before taxes, so it includes everything, versus gross profit or income, which is where we only take off the costs that are directly related or expenses that are related to the selling of the product, such as raw materials, manufacturing, labor, marketing, transportation. Those are all in the gross margin calculation. So when you're putting your value proposition together, it should tell the customer how your solution will help them in terms of their impact their business profitability. But you need to be able to differentiate with them what some of those costs are in the value proposition. When we talk about current ratio, this tells you whether the customer has the funds to be able to pay off its short-term debt, which is important when you're looking at whether this is a good customer to deal with, whether it's a good prospect to go after. So a higher ratio shows that the customer has better financial health. It also shows that they can afford the solution or they have access to the cash to be able to pay for the investment. Those with a lower ratio may need financing for the purchase, or you might want to suggest, as I said before, leasing versus purchasing to help them preserve cash flow that might help their business to be more profitable in the long run. The worst thing you can do is sell that customer something that they can't afford, and at the very least, it may only be the last sale that you make to the customer if you don't take these things into account. When we talk about financial statements, and this is the basic for salespeople, they need to be able to read and understand what we mean by financial statements. These include the balance sheet, or sort of a snapshot of what the net worth of the business is. It's a summary of all of their assets and liabilities. The income statement, or called the profit or loss statement, and it's what the company has earned and spent over a period of time. So it may be based on an income statement for the month or for the quarter or annually, but it really looks at the profitability of that business during that time frame. The statement of cash flow is the actual collection of revenues, so cash in, versus the payment of expenses, so cash out. And when you look at the cash flows, these are important things to identify within the customer in terms of their ability to afford the solution you're putting forward, or maybe you have to change your value proposition to them to at least align with the cash flow capabilities that they have. And finally, the fourth is the statement of shareholders' equity, and this is the controlling interest in the business. Who owns shares, or who owns the proportion of the business? And you have there's a financial or fiduciary responsibility to show these changes. So if you're having funders who are going to have to fund this, they're going to want to understand in funding the sale that you're making to these people, do they have the capital to be able to make the repayments for the terms of the loan? And this is something that you don't want to find out at the end of the day. You should be doing the financial analysis up front to make sure that when this deal is being done, that the capability is there for the customer to be able to afford it. When we talk about asset turnover, this is particularly important in retail or wholesale and in perishable products. Asset turnover is your total sales divided by the assets of the business. It shows how quickly the customer can sell its products. And it has big implications. If the capital that the customer has is tied up in unsold inventory, then it can invest in other solutions that you might want to be selling to them. So better asset turnover shows a better return that the business has on the use of its money, and shows a customer that you has the capability to afford the solutions you're trying to put forward. And finally, when we talk about Capex versus OPEX, Capex is the expense that has a benefit in the future. It's a one-time purchase that is a depreciating asset and is written off over time. The life of the purchase extends beyond the current accounting period typically, and it's an example of that might be a big piece of equipment or a printing press for a printer. The OPEX, on the other hand, is the expense for day-to-day operation of the business. It's the costs and expenses for the things that the company uses. The expenses for the current period or accrued for a later period if it's not fully utilized. So if I use the example of the printing press for the printer as a capital expense and Capex, then the ink and the paper in that or utilized by that press would be OPEX, or typically short-term operating expenses. So that just gives you an example of some of the key financial measures that are important for every salesperson to understand. The more that your salespeople have the capability to talk about these things with customers and to position their sales so that it's something that the customer is able to manage and they can see the financial benefit to their business of your product, as well as make sure that from a company standpoint that we're selling things to customers at a margin and at a volume that we can both produce and we can make enough return on that the company is going to be profitable. I had one situation where I was dealing with a salesperson in a very large packaging company. This person was literally treated like God in the company, because their sales were over 300 million, and they were probably 50% higher than the next performing salesperson. Lots of product moved, lots of customers sold to. When the analysis was done of those sales, there was marginal profitability. So the comp plan had been paying this person handsomely for several years. And when the comp plan was changed to focus more on margin than it was on revenues, he was gone within 6 months. So the implications when we start to look at the financials around sales become much more important, and they start to give us a better benchmark or guideline we start to look at our sales. One of the things that I always suggest is that salespeople need to be held accountable for the financials and the kinds of sales that they're making, not just the number of sales or the overall total revenues. So how do we develop the financial acumen with salespeople? This isn't just about things that we want them to understand. It's how do we make these people better business people? Part of it is recruitment and selection. Very often we focus our recruitment of salespeople on their experience, what industry they're in, what they've sold, whether they've achieved club status at their previous location, and why they're leaving. The other method that we found much more important in terms of identifying the kinds of people that you want is to utilize a competency model that includes some sort of financial or business acumen. The competency model can identify the kinds of questions that you ask in that recruitment process. It can allow you to compare people or candidates that you have for the sales job and compare them on a like benchmark, one of which is the kinds of competencies that these people have. You can ask them the kinds of questions that actually test them and their ability to understand not just the financial terms, but ask them to provide you with examples of very profitable or valuable sales that they've had in the past, and why were they so valuable. So you have to ask the right questions in order to be able to assess whether the people that you're recruiting, you're bringing into these jobs, whether it's at an entry level or a novice sales level, or people that you're trying to bring in because you think they can have a very large impact on your business. You want to make sure that that impact is going to be a positive financial impact. Secondly, in-house programs. Very often, one of the things that we've done with sales organizations in the past is when they bring their salespeople together for sales meetings, utilize some of that time to look at some of the key skills that you may want to train everybody on to raise the benchmark. One of these is looking at some of the financial implications of the sales that they're making and what it means to the customer, what it means to them from a compensation standpoint, but also what it means to the company in terms of profitability. And a little tip here is make sure that when you run those sessions, you send them away with homework. Ask them to take 5 accounts and do a financial analysis of those accounts and come back to you with what are the implications and what would they change based on that analysis. Performance management. Account reviews are something that we see becoming more and more of an institution within sales organizations. Very often, whether it's a remote sales force or one that's concentrated at a head office, in the past, we haven't seen as many sales management groups having their salespeople stand up and present their accounts. We're starting to see a lot more of that now, and part of that presentation should be looking at the financials of the customer, looking at the financials of the pipeline and the customers that are in there, and why these are good sales and why they're focusing on these particular accounts. So account reviews, as well as looking at the information that you're asking your salespeople to capture in your CRM, will help them to identify whether these are really good prospects or customers. Incorporate it into your sales process. So an example here is when you're looking at solution selling, and more organizations now are at least talking about solution selling. But true solution selling is looking at how you're going to value that or position that with your customer. You need, especially where there's going to be a bigger investment in time and resources on your part to put together a solution, because very often this will include perhaps sales engineers who have to go out and look at a job and find out what needs to be done and how much time it's going to take to be done. It's not enough for the salesperson to just go out to the customer and say, I've got solutions for you. Most of the solutions require resources inside, whether it's product specialists or whether it's technical specialists to help craft the solution. You have finance people that are helping you put together the financials for that. It's really important that the financial analysis of this customer be done up front before you commit to putting together a solution, to make sure that the customer has the capability to provide value to you for the amount of resource that you're going to employ in order to make the sale. And finally, mentoring. Sales managers and sales executives have to ask the right questions. They need to be talking to salespeople about the financials, not just about the products, not just about the customer, but delving more and more into why did you choose that customer? What's the business look like? Why did you think this was the right customer for us to go after? This sale, in review, this sale wasn't as profitable as we need sales to be. So what are we going to do in future sales to ensure that the kinds of business that you're bringing in are giving us the kind of a return on investment for us to provide the product to the customer? So mentoring, making sure that your process supports it, reviewing accounts, training people to be able to do this, and selecting the right people is all about how to develop the financial acumen. And I can tell you, organizations that I have seen that invest in these kinds of processes do better. Their financials are better, their sales are stronger, and they also have salespeople that are much more capable of delivering. So, Ruplan, I think we open it up for questions. A couple of questions for me. Was this valuable as a primer? It wasn't intended to be a full education. We wanted to make sure that it stimulated a little bit of interest. And will it cause you to do anything different? Is it something that you can look at and say, is our sales force where we need it to be in terms of financial literacy? And if not, what will we do to make that happen? So now it's up to you.
Thanks so much, David. And yes, of course, the question and answer period is now open. So if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat function, and we'll be sure to address them all online. And we did have a couple questions at the beginning of the session asking if the webinar was going to be available after the fact. Yes, it will be available and emailed to you, emailed to all of the attendees in a couple days. So feel free to enter your questions. We'll just give it a few minutes, David.
And I will say, if you have questions or you are looking, you want some direction, I'm not the kind of consultant that hits the clock as soon as the phone rings. So feel free to reach out to me. My email address is D for David, D Johnston, Johnston, at salesresourcegroup, all one word, .ca. So D Johnston at salesresourcegroup.ca. And my phone number is 416-805-0208.
Thanks so much, David. I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate that. But so far, I think that you covered everything. Oh, we do have a couple here. So the first one is, what were the 4 primary financial statements to focus on? If we could go back, David.
Yep, that's the balance sheet, the income statement, the statement of cash flows, and the statement of shareholders' equity.
Thank you so much. We'll just lean into the next ones here. We've got a few. The next one is, what do you see are common mistakes that new salespeople make?
Well, I think when I see novice people, they tend to focus on what the customer is asking them for, as opposed to them asking questions of the customer. So they tend to listen to the customer's needs, but they don't really explore enough. They need to be questioning, and this is where the consultative side of selling has been changing. It's to get deeper and deeper. If a customer says, I have this issue, it's not enough to just write down the issue. You need to be going back to the customer and saying, how long have you had this issue? Is there anything that occurred in the business that's caused this? What has that issue cost you as a business? How would you, what would the value be to you to be able to resolve this issue? So novice salespeople tend to listen, which is good. It's good to listen, but they also need to dig a little bit deeper.
And the next one here, I understand the importance of knowing a customer's financial profile, but how do you go about bringing that up in a conversation? Is a good question.
Well, it's gonna vary depending on what the conversation is about. So if I'm looking at my value proposition, I'll say, you know, when I'm looking to prepare a solution for you, I want to make sure that I put something together that makes sense for both you and I. Have you budgeted for this? Is there some, is there a way in which I can, or a budget that I can target? And what will this do in terms of your cash flows? And is it if I come forward with something you can't afford, can we come back and maybe reposition this? So, I mean, it's, no two are going to be exactly the same. You don't want to say, I want to find out if you're financially solid. That doesn't really go over well with customers, obviously. But you do need, some of the exploration should be done in the research that you do. So if you're looking at the financial statements of a company and you're doing some exploratory research, one of the things that I've had somebody call me actually about 2 weeks ago, and they are looking at starting a business to work with the cannabis market. And they said, how should we be positioning our value proposition with the industry and with particular customers? And I said, well, if you've been looking at the industry, the shares for companies in this marketplace have been down 40 to 70% in the last 6 to 8 months. So the question is this the right time to be jumping in there? And secondly, if you have a company companies that are struggling with cash flow and they're not meeting revenue expectations, how deep do you want to get into that industry? You know, with your new business. So there isn't one answer. It does take research up front, and it does take some penetration when you're talking with the customer about their financial situation. You need to start asking questions that help them to, and they will talk to you about their financial position, by the way. If you begin the conversation around how we could work together and what you're prepared to invest and what would they be prepared to invest. These are the things that stimulate the kinds of answers that help you identify whether or not they're a good candidate.
Thank you, David. We have someone asking if you have any recommendations for a handbook on basic financial literacy. Would you have any?
There are a couple out there. What I would suggest is send me an email if you're really interested, and what I'll do is I'll pull out the references, because I keep files on a lot of this stuff, so I can maybe pull out a couple of references to send to you.
Thank you. So we have time for just 2 more questions. So the next one is important. How do you approach coaching experienced staff who are not really coachable, or who maybe have an ego about learning the basics of financial literacy?
Well, I think the way that you deal with those situations is through your account reviews. Probably one of the most difficult bosses I had, who was very hard to get along with, and what he did was in public forums. So when our sales group would get together once a quarter to do account reviews, he wouldn't tell people who was going to be picked. And when he picked someone and they got up and weren't prepared, he would literally roast you in front of your peers. I don't advocate that. It wasn't a nice experience, but I think it is important that when you are doing these account reviews, that people can defend them. So if part of your account review is for them to go through the financials of 1 or 2 of their customers, it'll soon become evident to those people that if they don't stand up and learn this, that it's going to be pretty embarrassing for them in front of their peers, and it's going to be embarrassing in front of customers.
Thank you, David. And then just the next one here. You had mentioned that sales should understand the customer's profitability and net margins, similar to the first question, before going in to talk about sales. How do we go about collecting this information for a smaller company specifically? Typically, a listed company would have this info publicly available.
Good point. For smaller businesses, I think some of that, you can do some research. You can go and look at, do some research on the internet to see what the types of customers, usually companies will have some of their customers listed, so you can see the kinds of businesses that they're doing business with. I think in particular with smaller businesses, though, most of your research is going to be in front of the customer. Mm-hmm. You know, the ideal is to, you know, say, I'd like to introduce you to our products. I'd like the opportunity to just talk with you and find out a little bit more about your business, and see if it makes sense for us to do business. If not, that's fine, but I'd like the opportunity to talk to you a bit more. And that's when you start to look at some of the questions that you would put together to be able to identify where this business is at. How long have you been in business? What's your growth like? You know, how have you found, you know, the movement from starting your business to where you are today? What have been some of your biggest financial challenges? You know, how have taxes impacted you? There's lots of questions that you can ask and find out a little bit how they're funded, etc. And that will tell you whether or not the customer has the wherewithal to purchase your products and services, and where they're at in their business life cycle.
Thank you. I also have a few people asking for your email address. Again, David, do you mind providing again? Sure.
It's D Johnston, JOHNSTON, at Sales Resource Group, all one word, .ca.
Amazing. Thanks so much. I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate that. And I think that's all the time we have for questions. So, of course, on behalf of the CPSA, David, thank you so much for hosting another incredible webinar. And, of course, thank you to our audience for attending today. Again, if you'd like a recording of the webinar, the link will be available and sent to you shortly after today. And if you have any questions about this webinar or any of the other webinars that we're hosting, please email me at salessuccess@cpsa.com. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Rupalin. It's always good working with you in the CPSA.
Thanks so much, David. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.